Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this virtual event, What is Augmented DataFinOps? With SanjMo Advisory and Unravel Data. First, a few quick housekeeping items. You can use the chat to say hello or leave a comment. Pop a question in the Q&A and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Help us improve. Share your feedback on the session by rating this webinar and let us know if there are other topics you would like to hear about. So let's dive right in. Got a great agenda lined up for you today. So we're going to start with an overview of the rise of DataOps and set the stage for Augmented DataFinOps and what that is and why it's important. And then Chris Santiago is going to share how to implement Augmented DataFinOps using Unravel. And we've reserved the last 20 minutes for Q&A where you can win swag. The top 10 questions will earn limited edition swag. So without further ado, let me introduce our first guest, Sanjeev Mohan. Sanjeev is the founder of SanjMo Advisory Services and a former vice president at Gartner Research. So Sanjeev, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Clinton. It is my honor and my pleasure to be on this webinar today. We are going to talk about some really critical, essential developments in data and analytics space. I spent many years as an analyst at Gartner before I left to start my own advisory firm. And now I get to hang out with people like Clinton and Chris Santiago and talk about cutting edge, more business-facing problems that our customers and organizations are looking for and help them resolve those issues. So great to be on this webinar. Thanks, Clinton.
You bet. Thank you for joining us, Sanjeev. And then Chris Santiago, our VP of Solutions Engineering here at Unravel.
Thanks, Clinton. Hi, Sanjeev. My name is Chris Santiago. I am the VP of Solutions Engineering here at Unravel Data. I have the pleasure of working with customers all over the world, big and small, on solving some of their biggest data challenges. And here today, I'm happy to share some of my experiences, best practices that I've learned and my customers have learned along the way, trying to tackle this FinOps problem.
Awesome. Great to have you with us today, Chris. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Sanjeev, I'll let you share your screens and we'll dive into some Q&A. And of course, as we do this, attendees, as you have questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box and we'd be happy to answer as many of those as we can. Perfect. So Sanjeev, as we talk about this topic of Augmented DataFinOps, let's set the stage a little bit in terms of DataOps. First of all, what is DataOps and how does that relate to FinOps and why are these such hot topics right now?
So Clinton, thank you for asking that question. We have to acknowledge what this new year, 2023, well, it's the last day of this month of February in 2023, but it's still relatively new. We have encountered some economic headwinds, especially in the tech sector. Not most of the economy seems to be moving along, but in the tech sector. So we are being asked a lot of questions that we are not used to or comfortable with, like, what do you really do? Why have I spent $5 million on my IT budget last year? And what did I really get out of it? So what we are starting to notice is that there's a huge emphasis on being efficient, being clear and crisp into what you do. And a lot of that stuff comes from a discipline called DataOps. So DataOps basically is, you've got data producers, you've got data consumers. What happens to get the data from producers to consumers? What happens in between is literally data management. How you do it, the discipline is DataOps. So we have a Gartner definition here. DataOps primarily consists of some major big blocks. For example, automation, extremely important. We don't want to have human in the loop unless there's an absolute need for it. So it's not like everything and anything should be automated, but as much as possible, we want to automate things to run faster, reliably, consistently. Orchestration. is the second big piece. We want to be able to orchestrate jobs, again, with some automation and with context. The third big pillar is testing, continuous deployment, shift left, being able to do root cause analysis and things like that. But then the fourth pillar is called observability, and that is rising to be a very important thing. That is how I get transparency into how my pipeline or my data is performing. So knowing the state of data is the first step you need to make sure your data quality is high, reliability is good, and cost is understood. So those are the four big building blocks of DataOps.
That's awesome. Now, what would you say that data teams need in order to implement this new world of FinOps around data? Like, what kind of level of visibility do they need to make this possible?
Clinton, great question. So I mentioned how in observability, we've got a number of things. So we start with data quality, because data quality is really the low-hanging fruit. If my data is not high quality, it doesn't matter what I do in downstream systems. My models will be wrong. My reports, dashboards will show incorrect financial data, which nobody likes that to happen. So that was the first step. Then we moved to pipeline reliability and making sure that we knew if a pipeline failed or if it's running slow, or if there's some anomaly, we could catch that before it impacted our downstream systems. The sign of maturity of DataOps and observability in particular is when we migrate into FinOps. FinOps really is having a financial lens to how my data and pipelines are performing. For example, let's say I have a pipeline with a number of Kafka resources. I'm using Kafka as an example. It could be anything. How do I know that I have the right resources, I have the right utilization, and I'm not wasting my cost? Recent surveys have shown 30% of cloud cost is actually wasted, is over-provision. I thought we were moving into the cloud, so we could be like, we could save and be, paper consumption and save all this over provisioning that we had to do in on-prem, but we are still doing it. So FinOps is the discipline of understanding and assessing where are my costs, who's consuming it, and then coming up with some sort of a strategy to remediate and reduce my cost. So I mentioned, I just finished this thought. I mentioned how you're looking at cost. I gave Kafka as an example, but we are literally looking at different levels. We're looking at resource utilization, and that was my Kafka example. We're looking at user level, department level. How do we know which department is consuming cost? And we're looking at workload level. Is it my machine learning training models cost? Is it my ETL cost? Is it my SQL reporting, dashboarding cost? So FinOps helps us understand how we are consuming these resources and where these costs should be allocated.
Oh, that's so helpful, Sanjeev. And we have a question here from the audience. Has FinOps been focused on certain tech stack versus traditional DataOps? And how has FinOps been able to help startups especially? Yeah.
Great question. So I'm glad to see that we're already starting to get questions. So FinOps is not a DataOps per se piece. FinOps actually started under what is broadly called cloud financial management. Every hyperscale cloud provider, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they all, and everybody else, they all have a whole module and a set of best practices on cost management. So it's become such a big piece of how we do jobs in cloud, that there is a whole organization under Linux Foundation called FinOps.org. And you can see it on this slide. This definition on FinOps is from FinOps.org. They have certification exams. In fact, Clinton just got certified to be a FinOps practitioner. So FinOps is a broad space. But FinOps started mostly on the infrastructure and application side. When we take that discipline and we apply it to data, we get data FinOps.
Oh, that's very helpful, Sanjeev. Now, let's talk a little bit about this notion of augmented FinOps, and how does it relate to AI and machine learning?
Yes. So the reality is that cost management is not for the faint of the heart. So let me put it bluntly. I was reading a very interesting article, and we are happy to share the link. Let's take an example of a large system integrator like Accenture. Accenture has now over 1,000 teams that use Amazon Web Services. Over 1,000 teams. When they get the consolidated bill from AWS, that bill runs into tens of millions of lines of breakdown, cost breakdown. How is a human, one person, or even a team able to parse through that and look for those nuggets and say, this is where we can save cost? So augmented is this ability to use machine learning algorithms, being able to infer and identify and pinpoint at a very granular level, or aggregate it, depending upon where you are in the organization, and identify where am I maybe wasting cost, and I can avoid it. So that's why augmented is so important, because using these machine learning models, not only can we identify patterns, but we can also predict it. For example, if I can predict that my cost is growing very rapidly, I know that I'm going to overgrow my budget allocation. So that whole forecasting, budgeting, all that thing is something that is more predictive, and we can use augmented data FinOps for that.
That's amazing, Sanjeev. And are you already seeing analysts like Gartner talk about this notion of like augmented FinOps and using AI and machine learning for that? Do you have a slide to share on that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Let's look at it. It's right here on Hype Cycle. In fact, some of my colleagues, even on the database management side, Adam Ronther is one of them, very, very deep into the FinOps space, even for data management systems for many years now. Gartner has also been sort of a market leader when it comes to augmented products where we're using AI and ML. And you can see that in this is the familiar Hype Cycle, and you can see that the augmented FinOps is actually at the very beginning of its journey. So it has a long way to go before it reaches what we call the plateau of productivity. So I strongly believe that we are only now getting educated and disciplined about managing cost associated with the data aspects, and this is going to only go up over the next few years in this Hype Cycle journey.
Wow, that's incredible, and to think about the growth that's possible there. So, Sanjeev, how do you think augmented FinOps applies to data teams?
So let's look at this journey that I've been talking about. We have DataOps, we have FinOps, and now we have data FinOps. So Clinton, the beauty of what you just asked is that there is a realization now that data FinOps is everybody's problem. There was, when we first got into the whole FinOps space, what a lot of my clients did was they stood up a team. And first of all, they have to figure out, does this team sit under the CIO, CTO, or the CFO, or the COO? So we see it spread across different spaces. So a team was stood up with a practice leader whose job was to find out, do all of the phases of FinOps that we will talk about during this webinar. Now what I'm seeing is that it is everyone's job. If I'm a data engineer and I am going to run a SQL query that is badly written, and I end up doing a Cartesian join of two tables with millions of rows, that bill is going to reach the CFO's desk, and no one's going to be happy about it. So my point is that I see that now there's an understanding that data FinOps needs to happen at the entire hierarchy, including at the data engineer, who should have an understanding that there's a cost of everything you do in the cloud, and we need to be good citizens and handle it properly.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, great examples, Sanjeev. And then, Chris, we just returned from our offsite, and we talked about some of these scenarios that we're hearing from customers. What are you hearing today?
Yeah, so I mean, we've shared some interesting stories. I've also had some experiences working with some of these customers as well. You know, I think that we're at that stage where customers are beyond the POV stage of these technologies. They've committed to tax like Snowflake, Databricks, and now they're starting to grow their workloads. And what we're finding is that folks are starting to really pay attention to cost, right? A lot of these customers are coming in from an on-prem model where we've had sunken cost infrastructure. And so what you would waste before would just be time. And now with the cloud and you're actually being charged by consumption, every little bit counts. So if there's inefficiencies in your SQL queries or your jobs itself, that ends up being a spend that wasn't accounted for. And folks are starting to hit their budgets faster than ever before. In fact, it's such a big problem that, in this slide here, we've got industry analysts estimate that at least 32% of cloud spend is wasted each year, quoted from Flexera. We've also have some other cases where we have 60% of infrastructure and operation leaders will encounter public cloud cost overruns. So this is also from Gartner as well. And last but not least, 2/3 of organizations do not see substantial ROI from cloud transformation programs. This is from KPMG, but this is also from my experience as well. I think a lot of folks have been lured in from the promise of what the cloud can do in terms of elastic infrastructure, but without a proper FinOps strategy in place, we are seeing a lot of customers struggling from this. In fact, as most organizations that have started to run a lot of their data applications and pipelines in the cloud, they're finding out that this is really expensive very, very quick. And in many cases, it's not unusual to see monthly budget overruns of 40% or more, or for companies that have committed to a 3-year budget and they're starting to see within 6 months, 7 months that they've already blown out their 3-year budget. So that's not that's a very common thing that I'm hearing. Cloud bills are usually an organization's biggest IT expense, and the sheer massive size of data workloads is driving most of these cloud bills. Many companies are feeling ambushed by their monthly cloud bills, and simply understanding where the money is going is a challenge, let alone figuring out where and how to rein in those costs and keeping them under managed. Consequently, we're seeing these cloud migration projects and modernization initiatives are also stalling out. So plans to scale up and use some of the elasticity of these modern platforms like Databricks, Snowflake, Amazon EMR, even Google BigQuery are actually hitting a wall.
And when you look at that, Chris, from your perspective, I'd be curious to understand, what are the biggest challenges that the data teams are facing from a FinOps perspective? What kinds of problems are they encountering that they could really use some help?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the biggest challenges is just starting from a visibility standpoint, right? So just understanding where the costs are going. If we look at some of the cloud bills that the infrastructure cloud vendors give us today, it's it's aggregated at a specific level, right? Usually monthly, down to maybe the infrastructure level, but that's not what users are looking for. They're looking for things that are going to be a little bit more fine-grained, things such as how about down to the user level, to the department, so on and so forth. And so because there is visibility that's lacking, it's hard to really get in front of this. In fact, even from an infrastructure standpoint, I think a lot of folks think that's, let's actually solve this FinOps, or FinOps is really all about just optimizing from an infrastructure perspective. But in many cases, that's just, a third of the battle, right? How are we doing in terms of responsibility from the coding perspective? Are folks right-sizing their infrastructure, or better yet, are they actually writing responsible code, right? It's very common that I see a lot of folks will use, for example, like if they have a SQL background and maybe it's they've been repurposed from their Oracle beginnings, going now starting to do something like in Snowflake, and now they're doing these bad practices that they were in a smaller data set, but now doing something such as like a select star, or maybe there is a partition table and they're not bringing in the partition keys itself. That's going to blow up the data, and obviously your costs are going to go up even more. So a lot of folks don't even go down to that level of detail. They're trying to solve this all from an infrastructure perspective, but in many cases, FinOps is deeper. This is a team issue. This is bringing responsibility to the development teams itself and saying that, like, hey, we need to make sure that we're also being responsible and writing efficient code as well.
Oh, great example, Chris. And we have a question here from the audience. So they ask, Chris, you talk here about wastage, et cetera, but what typically is an entry point to Unravel for a typical customer? In other words, what is it that makes a customer decide we need Unravel? Is it cost? Is it breakdown in pipelines that tips matters over the edge? Or is it all of the above?
That's a great question. I would say it's all of the above, right? Because more specifically, it depends on the persona, the folks that are actually looking to solve something with a platform like Unravel. I'll give you a few examples. So if I'm a developer and maybe I'm writing some PySpark applications and I'm always challenged by making this more performant, or I'm always looking for reasons why my pipeline is erratic. Sometimes it fails, sometimes it just runs very slowly. I'm going to be interested in some of the using some of the AI ML for helping to speed up MTTR, or look for ways for me to optimize from that standpoint. If I'm the architect, I want to make sure that things overall are working together. So cost also starts coming into play there. They know that there's a budget that they've signed up for, and where we want to be tracking things from that perspective. You've got the business as well, which they may not even know what the stack is. All they know is that they've got some product line that they've committed to the customer, to the board, to their stakeholders, and they've chosen a tech stack based on some of the feedback from their architects. And they're they want to be able to track what's my true ROI, like what is my cost, over time. Are we doing things to optimize? Are we doing things to govern? Have guardrails set up in place, so that way, we are keeping our costs to a minimum to, be responsible from that perspective, so we can maximize ROI. So lots of different use cases that folks will look for a platform like Unravel to solve this.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Now, when you think about implementing this, methodology, how does a data FinOps lifecycle help the team members who are involved here?
Sorry. Okay, it's a great question. So let me start off by answering that with this flywheel here. There's a lot of benefits. A FinOps approach isn't just about slashing costs, although invariably you will just wind up just saving money. It's really all about empowering your data engineers, your architects, your developers, the business teams, really get them all together so that way they're making better choices about their cloud usage and deriving the most value from their modern data stack investments. The way we see things is dividing this into 3 sections here. And this would be our iterative phases along the FinOps lifecycle. First, we'll start off on the observability side. So really, we want to start getting visibility into where that money, where that money is going. Being able to measure that what's happening in your cloud environment and really understand what's going on in a workload-aware context. Things that are more granular than what you might get from your Amazon cloud bill, right? So it's great that I can understand where my infrastructure spend is going, but what about down to the user level that may be using different systems? What about if I were to optimize, what were some of the things, what were some cost savings from that perspective? But it really first starts coming down to how granular is your data so we can actually start observing trends from that perspective. The next section here is really that optimization. And so once we understand where spend is going, let's actually go and try to do something about it. So let's optimize. Let's start seeing patterns emerge where you can actually eliminate waste and removing inefficiencies to make things better, faster, more efficient. Once that is in place, the last piece and critical piece is let's actually set up some governance here where we can go and start going from this reactive problem solving to more of a proactive problem, sustaining iterative improvements, doing automated guardrails and enabling self-service optimization. You know, think of this as each phase building upon the former. So not 3 separate tracks, but 3 that build upon each other to create a virtuous cycle of continuous improvement and empowerment for our individual team members, regardless of expertise. So that way they can make better decisions about their cloud usage while still hitting their SLAs. In essence, this shifts the budget left, pulling upon accountability for managing costs going forward.
This is fantastic, Chris. Really appreciate it. Okay, so feel free to put your questions in the Q&A if you have any other questions. And then what we'd like to do is we'll give Chris a little bit of time here to show us how this actually works. And then if you have questions, we'll take some of those in the last 20 minutes. And so for those who submit the top 10 best questions, you'll receive Unravel swag. So thank you very much.
So Clinton, one question I see is people are asking like more on like case studies, like what is it that organizations are asking, looking for overall, like big picture. So a few questions that I have come across lately are things like organizations are asking for what parts of the pipeline are experiencing higher costs than the historical trends. So they want to identify that anomaly. I'm also hearing people want to know what will be the impact of disrupting the job causing runaway costs. So Chris mentioned, you know, people do select star, they don't put a where clause, or they're writing this. So if you determine that SQL is causing a lot of cost overrun and you kill it, what's going to be the impact on the downstream jobs? You know, so that lineage is really important. I also get questions on what are the cost trends, things that Chris mentioned. When will it exceed budget? My budget was for the whole year, but 3 months in, now you tell me that you need to get more money allocated. Another question is, when will the cost saving offset the cost of procuring and running the data observability tool? So I got Unravel, but how soon can I show the ROI on that? And I think this is such a great question, because a lot of products in the data and analytics space, unfortunately, have a very blurry ROI. It's like, how do you know? It's like, you know, how much money did the data catalog save you? But a FinOps tool is an immediate ROI. So in some ways, actually, that ROI is built into it. And then the last question that I just wanted to bring up is is this fine-grained cost breakdown into jobs and consumptions, which you don't get out of the cloud builds. So on one hand, the cloud builds are super detailed with every egress cost and NAT and VPC cost and this cost and that cost, but where it really matters, they don't have that visibility. So that's where the data FinOps is being used to get that next level of understanding of the cost. So
Oh,
Chris,
that's so helpful.
yeah, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's exactly it. I mean, I think folks right now, in terms of just really understanding where costs are going, they're feeling limited with some of the out of the box reports that are out there today. There are other solutions that are out there as well, like things such as like Probability, Turonomics, that have a very general overview that do solve some of these cases, right? But when we start looking at things that are more complex in nature, like distributed platforms, like a Databricks, like a EMR, like a Snowflake itself, that's where things start breaking down. And I can understand infrastructure, like how much compute instances, but like, okay, what was the breakdown? What was the percentage of the users' departments from that perspective? They don't really have that visibility, right? So that's when you want to start looking at more platforms like an Unravel that have a specific granularity that we can actually answer those types of questions from a FinOps perspective.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's really great. Yeah, so Chris, one of the questions that I think we would all be interested to understand better now is how does this augmented piece play with data FinOps? Where does the AI and machine learning come into play, and how can Unravel help to reduce the time it takes to implement these cost savings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if you think about organizations, we're talking hundreds, sometimes thousands of users, and doing ad hoc jobs, production jobs, and that could equate to hundreds of thousands of jobs per day. In fact, some of our largest customers are actually are at that scale. Now, if you were to do this in a manual fashion, that's a lot of work. In fact, it's pretty much impossible to be able to provide some sort of guidance, efficiency in terms of looking at everything across the organization, across those hundreds of thousands of jobs per day, and try to find ways for efficiency, right? That's where you'll need some platform that has some intelligence built in to actually say, okay, out of those 100,000, let's actually focus in on these 1,000, and out of those 1,000, these 100 are the ones that are making up 80% of your inefficiencies, right? That's the game changer, right? Because without that, it's almost a shot in the dark. It's finding a needle in a haystack of trying to figure out, which jobs, which pipelines are most inefficient. And in fact, I can show this when we break to the demo. But yes, that is the trend that we're seeing a lot of customers really starting to gravitate towards, is how do I actually use some of the intelligence that's out there to not only provide that observability, but show me ways to optimize in an intelligent fashion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. All right, so we've had a few questions already come in, and please go ahead and continue submitting those so that throughout the demo, so we can answer your questions and show you what it looks like. And then at the end, we'll take a few minutes just to wrap up with those questions. So, okay, so Chris, over to you to share your screen.
Sounds good. Wait here till this is loading. And so what I'd like to walk the audience through here is what life is like solving this data FinOps challenge with a platform that was built for, purpose-built for modern data platforms, in this case, like a Databricks. And so life without Unravel is, trying to solve this, it's a very manual process. I can connect to the APIs that are out there and try to aggregate this information, but the challenges that they find is that this is very manual. It's aggregated up to the service level. It's batch processed. We're not getting this information real time. And if I want to go deeper and understand things such as, a specific user, that's where things start breaking down. I wanted to start here on this chargeback report because it's, if we think about that flywheel that I'd shown first, is we really want to start off from an observability standpoint. So in this case, I'm just very curious to see where my cost is going in my Databricks environment. So I could have production workspaces, I can have development workspaces. You'd be surprised on some of the sizes of development workspaces that I see a lot of customers. And even more surprised that a lot of customers don't realize when things are failed or slow, they're actually paying for this, right? And so what you're seeing here right now is a 10,000 foot view of where costs are going. And let's go ahead and say the last 30 days here. And so I can start looking at things in terms of where's my spend at a workspace level? You know, is it my ML recommendation workspace? Is it my sign up subscription workspace? I can also visually see, you know, where my spend is going, right? So which one of my workspaces are costing me the most? A very popular ask is, let's actually look at users. So it could be personal accounts, could be service accounts, but it really, if I wanted to understand in this Databricks environment, I could be running SQL, I could be running data machine learning notebooks, I could be running just job clusters itself. You know, all that spend being aggregated down to the user level. This isn't something that you get, you know, with the out of the box reporting that are out there. And I can easily start seeing this in this particular report. So usually what customers will do next is, let's go ahead and sort by cost, because I want to know where my biggest spenders are, right? So in my last 30 days, I can see that this V Sharma user has been consuming about 45% of my cost. So, you know, almost half the cloud bill for the organization, right? So that's from a visibility standpoint. I can start really understanding that. If I click on this optimize, this actually shows me all the clusters that were made up to make up that particular cost itself. The next thing I'm going to show you guys is the optimization piece. And so for that, it'll make more sense if I actually go into one of these clusters. And so let me do, let me go ahead and just look at, by the way, I just clicked on this inefficient tab. And so really what I'm looking for is, let's go ahead and use this guy right here. And so in this particular case, from a observability standpoint, I can see graphs, but let me cut to the chase and just really focus your attention on this analysis tab here. And so this is where that AI is comes in, where we're not going to just show you this information. We're actually going to go and give you some recommendations. Think about it as an expert in the box to go in and actually say, you could look at all these nice and pretty graphs, but we're going to do one thing better and tell you what to do next. In this particular case, this is an infrastructure type recommendation. And so this is telling me essentially, you use this type of compute instance at 34 cents an hour. You could actually do this with a 22 cents an hour instance. And really the only difference here is if you look at the memory, it's from 14 gigs to 8 gigs. So in this particular case, which is a very common case, we see a lot of folks over allocate their jobs, right? Especially like in a development environment, because, hey, you know, who's actually going to be checking my, you know, my configuration? Is it going to be the business? Likely not, right? So I will always add just a few more resources just because I just want to make sure that this doesn't fail, right? But if you do this at a scale, that starts really adding up. So this is an example of an infrastructure type of recommendation, right? You know, very powerful stuff. The next one here, a little less tangible, but something super, super powerful is that we can see here, it says contented driver, it says time spent on the driver is 99% of the total application time. Now I know there's some less technical folks here. Think of this as this cluster was up and not doing anything for 99% of the time, right? So this isn't something that's going to be necessarily fixed by a configuration standpoint. This is actually pointing out an inefficiency of, hey, you forgot to turn this thing on or off. And so that becomes powerful again when you have something that's proactive and telling you these things across the, you know, in this case, this particular cluster. But if I just zoom back out here, it's this intelligence is actually being applied across all the jobs, all the clusters that are in the environment. And that's where that augmented piece comes in, right? Because we want to be able to understand, you know, what are we trying to solve for here? Is it because of just over allocation in my clusters? Now I've got this list. And I can also sort by cost and figure out which ones were the ones that were costing the most for me to start tackling, right? So that's where that optimization piece comes in. Now, what I'm going to do next year is I'm going to go back into cost. And let's say we've now have some good understanding of where costs are going. We know that we've identified areas where we can go ahead and optimize. Now let's actually go into this governance piece and actually set some guardrails here. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to do it by what we call this budget functionality here. So just as the name implies, it's a budget, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just make up a name here. So I'll call it my webinar budget here. I'm going to go ahead and track this from a monthly perspective. So month over month, I can set my start and end time here. Here, I can actually set my scope. So what I'm going to do here is actually, I'm going to go ahead and pick up my person before, V Sharma, who's had, we have some intelligence that's built in here to actually say, hey, last month they were at 240. I know that I had this conversation with them and I told them that, we need to start tracking your spend. And so we'll actually say 250 because we don't want you to go anything over that. I go ahead and click save. And this row here shows me, actually, it looks like I've blown this budget considerably now. So a little bit too late for today, but you can see here that I set my cost here. This is set at 250 DBUs. Cost is exceeded. I actually, yeah, so the cost is exceeded here. The person can get alerted through Slack, Teams, email, whatever it may be, or an organization that's actually tracking this, and we can start making action on that. One other example here that already exists is we have this shopping experience budget here, where we budgeted 590. We're at 110 today, right? So this is from a real-time fashion. And the way that we're consuming resources from a historical perspective, we can see that we are forecasted to blow out this budget at 771. So once this turns yellow, that notification channel can kick in. We can actually start getting alerted, right? So who is it? Maybe it's the shopping experience team. Maybe it's the development team itself to say, hey, look at your jobs, look at the recommendations that have been applied for your instances, and actually, get in front of this before, so we can actually get this from yellow back to green. And but most importantly, if we're just looking for overall budgets itself, we can get very fine grained in terms of setting these budgets. And so now we can really start taking control of some of these budget overruns down to as granular as you would like to get for your organization. With that, I'll stop sharing.
This is so powerful, Chris. Love it. And we've got a question here from our audience about this. Could you elaborate more with Kubernetes on the cluster area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for us, Kubernetes is really essentially just a orchestration engine, right? Replacing VMs with Kubernetes, right? Containers, right? All the stuff still applies, right? You still need to size your Kubernetes container, but you also need to look at the code itself, right? A SQL star on 11 join tables is still going to be a bad query, whether it's Kubernetes or VMs itself. So the way that we see it is you're still going to struggle from that perspective, but the challenge in terms of sizing the infrastructure and making sure the code is actually doing things responsibly, that doesn't go away.
This is just incredibly powerful, Chris. I really appreciate it, especially having that consistent view, no matter what the technology. What are some of the trends that you've been seeing lately around FinOps, Chris? Is this coming up in conversations with organizations that you speak with? Absolutely.
I would actually say that, Sanjeev, tell me, what your thoughts on this as well. But I would say folks are definitely starting to talk about it. A year ago, a few folks were doing this, and maybe they were even calling it FinOps. They were maybe calling it like we're a center of excellence where we're going to need to start getting in front of this. Today, I would say that some folks are aware of it, and if you look at FinOps.org itself, there's what, 7,500 companies today. Microsoft just joined it a couple of days ago. And so the adoption is absolutely starting to, take up, the uptick is exponential from what I see. I think that folks are still thinking that this is an infrastructure problem to begin with. And so, they're always looking for just taking advantage of what cloud has to offer, like turning things off when you don't need to use it, or maybe do some elastic auto scaling for workloads that need to do it. I think that's going deeper and solving this with, hey, it could be the people, it could be the development staff itself. That's, in many cases, is something that a lot of organizations haven't started looking at, but a lot of times that could be 40%, 50% of the, the cloud wastage to begin with, right? So I feel that it's an education process for some folks to say that, like, hey, look, infrastructure is great, but that's just one way of solving the problem. You do need to go back to that visibility, optimization, governance flywheel, and this is a team effort. And so, making sure that everybody's being responsible from the configuration, from the code, from the infrastructure itself is, somewhat of a new concept for some folks.
So if I may add another example, contrary to the general feeling, Hadoop is far from dead. There are very, very large banks that has several millions of dollars of investment into Hadoop. So they have like 4,500 nodes of Hadoop running. Now, a lot of these organizations want to move to the cloud. So cloud migration becomes a huge use case of FinOps, because you are going to move to the cloud and you have two options. Either you can stick to Hadoop and go to something like Google Cloud Dataproc, or you can go to something entirely different. You can go to Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift or something like that. So you have multiple options, but how do you know that you're not going to break the bank if and when you do migrate to the cloud? So you use Augmented DataFinOps to understand where are you incurring your costs currently on-prem, and then you extrapolate it into the cloud and figure out what would be the best resources. What kind of node should I use? A memory optimized node, or should I use an IO optimized node? And how big should be the amount of RAM on it? And all of that is something that you can then determine based on the kind of workloads you have on premises and right size it into the cloud. Very, very different from our first iteration, which was lift and shift. And that is why you hear things about repatriation back to on-premises. And people ask me this all the time. Is repatriation such a big deal? And I'm like, no, it's not. You hear about it because it gets elevated and everyone starts panicking about the cost in the cloud and moving it back to on-prem. But that's a very, very small percentage of the traffic in the other direction, which is to the cloud. So the idea is that maybe cloud is truly the right place to be. I'm not saying it is, because that depends upon your use case, but you want to do it by right sizing it. And for that, you need FinOps.
Oh, that's powerful. Yeah, get it right the first time as opposed to having to take it back.
Correct. Yeah.
I was just going to add one thing is I think that for folks that literally do a lift and shift, you're lifting and shifting the bad problems as well. So, I think that doing that extra exercise of taking advantage of what the cloud has to offer in terms of, right sizing, picking the right instances, turning things off when you don't need it is paramount if you really want to achieve the ROI that you're expecting.
Sure.
Fantastic. Well, Sanjeev, Chris, it's been a real pleasure to have you on this webinar with us. And thanks to all of our attendees and the questions that came in. We really appreciate it. Looking forward to working with customers to help them take advantage of AI and machine learning for this data FinOps use case.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Yes. Thanks, Clinton and Sanjeev.
Yeah.
Awesome. Take care.